Your podcast starts in 3, 2, 1.
Oh.
Good morning, Doctor. Time to wake up.
Well, thank you, Ivan. It's going to be a great day at the Mental Health Day podcast. I'm Todd Finnerty. I'm a clinical psychologist, and welcome to the show that celebrates National Take a Mental Health Day every day. You can learn more about that at www.mentalhealthday.org.
Well, where have you been? Yes, you. Where have you been, Mental Health Day podcast number 19? What, you said you were taking the summer off and you take the fall off too. My goodness. Well, that's right. Well, you're here now, Mental Health Day podcast number 19. But listen, if you find yourself missing large gaps of time, it's quite possible that you may need to listen to this podcast coming up. This is podcast number 19, and it's on harm reduction. And frankly, it's we'll call spade a spade. It's an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous or AA. My interview is with Kenneth Anderson, the executive director of HAMS, the Harm Reduction for Alcohol Network. And he is also the author of a book that you should pick up called How to Change Your Drinking, a Harm Reduction Guide to Alcohol, 2nd edition. Here goes. Kenneth Anderson, MA, is the author of the book How to Change Your Drinking, a Harm Reduction Guide to Alcohol, a self-help manual for safer drinking, reduced drinking, or quitting alcohol altogether. Mr. Anderson is also the founder and CEO of the HAMS Harm Reduction Network. HAMS is the first worldwide harm reduction-based support group specifically for people who drink alcohol. HAMS is lay-led and free of charge. Mr. Anderson has worked in the field of harm reduction since 2002. His wide range of experience includes serving as Director of Online Services at Moderation Management and working in the trenches of harm reduction doing needle exchange in Minneapolis. Mr. Anderson is a regular presenter at the National Harm Reduction Conference and has presented the HAMS Alcohol Harm Reduction Program to addiction counseling classes at NYU, the New School for Social Research, and many other venues. He hosts a weekly podcast called Addiction Treatments That Work and writes a blog for Psychology Today called Overcoming Addiction. Again, thank you. Thank you for doing the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me as a guest on the podcast.
Absolutely. And you know what that biography didn't mention, now that I'm thinking about it, is your book is How to Change Your Drinking, a Harm Reduction Guide to Alcohol, 2nd edition, which is actually pretty good. I have it here, and truthfully, I'm 3/4 of the way through, and I've been liking it. So,
Well, it seemed to me that there was a real need for a harm reduction approach to alcohol that would be similar to the harm reduction programs that were out there for drug users, such as needle exchange programs. And, most needle exchange programs also have some kind of counseling or support group that's attached to them so that drug users could come in and talk about their use and how they might want to change it, how they might maybe want to be safer, maybe want to make some changes like quitting one drug. Maybe they didn't want to do heroin anymore, but they like to smoke marijuana. Pat Denning's harm reduction, the Harm Reduction Therapy Center in San Francisco that's run by Pat Denning, Jeannie Little, and their colleagues has also really explored this a lot. She talks about it in her books Over the Influence and Practicing Harm Reduction Psychotherapy, 2nd edition. These were hugely influential on me, and I thought, people that drink alcohol really need these same kind of programs. And there wasn't anything like that.
Yeah, it seems like AA has been a pretty dominant force to some respect, but it's kind of an either or an or, right? It's like, if you have a problem, then it's abstinence. It's correct me if I'm wrong. How is harm reduction or the HAMS approach? How's it different from AA? Would you say?
It's almost totally diametrically the opposite.
I was trying to set you up.
But, some people like AA, and that's good. Some of my colleagues in needle exchange, that's how they quit heroin, they used to shoot heroin. They got clean through going to Narcotics Anonymous, did the 12 steps. But they said, the people that are out there still shooting up, if you don't get them some clean needles, if you don't do something, they're going to die. They're going to contract HIV. They're going to contract Hep C. And, the worse things that happen to you, the less likely you are to overcome your addiction. So, as I said, a lot of colleagues that I work side by side with in the needle exchange programs, they were members of Narcotics Anonymous, but they wouldn't talk about that when they were working in needle exchange, when they were working in harm reduction, because they knew that the first thing they had to do was meet people where they were at with their use. So when people would come in to, get clean needles, you'd say, wow, you're doing a really great thing by using clean needles, and we really appreciate that. And if people brought in used needles, we would say, this is really great, you got these off the street, and we would really appreciate that. And, because people were made to feel at home, they were welcomed, and, people would say, as a drug user, as a heroin user, this is the only place I can go and be treated like a human being and talk honestly about what I do, and people don't treat me like some kind of demon monster junkie. And, people would eventually, they would want to make more changes after a while. We had a lot of people that would say, after a few months, I want to look into methadone maintenance. I want to look into buprenorphine. I want to look into treatment to stop using heroin. So, it's a wonderful approach that helps to reach people who are not reached by more traditional approaches.
And that makes sense. And, I'm a psychologist, and you talk about something that may be more traditional. I like your meet people where they're at attitude, because it seems like a certain percentage of mental health professionals that somebody would go to might have the opinion where they're just, and I think there's even a reference to it in your book, they may have the opinion that they need to stop drinking alcohol. For example, we're talking about alcohol or drugs in general, marijuana. They need to stop that before they even start services, which, can be very difficult for somebody to just day one, stop using substances, right? So, I definitely appreciate that approach, because I know when I was being trained, that's kind of the message I got was, well, hey, you're not going to work. Don't even see them. Don't even work on their depression, because they're not going to. If they're not going to stop drinking, then you're not going to be able to get anywhere. So, I think maybe kind of the message that harm reduction has is it sounds like it's kind of different from that, right?
It's very different from that. What you're talking about has been very much the received wisdom in the psychotherapeutic community, as well as the substance abuse treatment community, is that they're separate, that you have to tell substance users that to go to substance use treatment, get clean, then afterwards we'll treat your mental health issues. And in many instances, the mental health, the substance use providers said, well, we can't treat people with mental health issues. You have to get those taken care of first, and then we can treat your substance use issues. And, people will get caught in this runaround. People with dual diagnosis, say they had depression and they drank too much. They had anxiety and they smoked marijuana, or, they had post-traumatic stress disorder. They shot heroin, and they would get, told, well, we can't treat your psychological conditions until you stop using. And then they go to a substance use provider and they'd say, you can't get substance use treatment until you get your mental health taken care of. Or if they were accepted, they were told there's only one way to do it. You have to quit all substances. You have to go to 90 AA meetings in 90 days. And, Andrew Tatarsky is one of the people that started experimenting with a different approach, which was to try to treat people who were actively using substances for their mental health issues and treat their substance use issues at the same time. And what he started finding was that he was having a huge success with people who were, being, discarded by the system otherwise. And Pat Denning is the other pioneer really in harm reduction therapy. And they found, well, received wisdom is not only not true, it's detrimental. It stops people from getting treatment that they need. And, the best way to deal with people with dual diagnosis is to help them change in ways they choose for themselves, work on both substance use issues and psychiatric issues at the same time. And, if somebody says, well, I want to quit heroin, but I want to be a moderate drinker, or I want to smoke a little marijuana now and then, support them in the positive changes they want to make in their substance use habits.
That makes sense. Now, if somebody wanted to get started with a harm reduction approach, what are some of the things they could do? As opposed, of course, you draw the comparison with AA and the 12 steps. What would it be like to start out with HAMS, for example?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk about our program now, which is the harm reduction for alcohol, which really didn't exist a lot before because, Tatarsky and Dinning focused more on drug use. Alcohol was kind of secondary to them. They talked about it a little bit. Ours was totally focused on alcohol because there's a lot of people that drink that don't use illegal drugs. They don't feel any commonality with illicit drug users. They feel really uncomfortable getting mixed together. So I was focusing strictly on the drinkers because that's also my own background, was to use alcohol. I didn't use any illicit drugs when I was in college. When I was 20, I smoked a little marijuana, but then it started making me depressed, and I just didn't do it anymore. Didn't have any experience with hard drugs or anything. So I started developing HAMS because, we needed something to address these drinkers who could not identify with the drug-using community. Getting started with HAMS, people can visit our website at hamsnetwork.org. We have 17 elements that comprise our program, and we call them elements and not steps because they are all optional. They can be done in any order. You can read through them. You can pick the one you'll like and start with the one you like and feel comfortable with. If you don't know where to start, then we say, okay, start with number one. And number one is to do a cost-benefit analysis of your drinking. And this is also known as a decisional balance sheet. It's used a lot in psychotherapy. And it's writing down on 4 sheets of paper. You write down the pros and cons of your drinking as it is right now and the pros and cons of the change you want to make. And it's very important, to look at all sides of this. If you go through traditional treatment, they tell you, okay, write down everything that is bad about drinking alcohol and write down everything that is good about recovery from alcohol. And, all the good things about drinking alcohol stay in your subconscious. All the bad things about not drinking, come up to bite you in the ass while you're abstaining. And that's why people relapse a great deal. And there was some research done, and they found that this was very ineffective compared to doing the cost-benefit analysis, where you look at both sides. Because when you actually think about what is good about drinking alcohol as well as what is bad, you bring that to your consciousness so that it's not festering in the subconscious, waiting there to sneak up on you. And you can also say things like, "Oh, I drink to relax." Well, wait a minute, what other things can I do to relax? And you can be aware and prepared. And you can also be aware and prepared, when you're not drinking, when you're abstaining, say if that's your goal is abstinence from alcohol. And then, you can be aware that, well, I'm going to not like some of these things. If I can't participate in events where my friends are drinking, if I can't go to this wedding where everybody's drinking, or if I have to go there and abstain, I'm going to feel uncomfortable. And that's going to be coming, and you're aware of it, and you're prepared for it. So that's why this is a very useful tool.
That makes sense. I think, there's probably a wider range of people that might be caught by that net, you know what I mean, when you're kind of saying, what's the cost of your drinking, what's the benefits, and even, the next step is to kind of choose a drinking goal, kind of like you started saying safer drinking or reduced drinking or quitting, where, and I hate to keep drawing comparisons to AA, but if you just kind of say, accept the addict label and become abstinent, there's a lot of people that maybe aren't at that point yet, and they just kind of say, and they're willing to admit that there's a lot of negative consequences about their drinking, and there's a lot of problems, and maybe they should kind of change some of that. but they're not willing to go the abstinence route yet and call themselves an addict. So maybe they never really get caught up in trying to change anything or reduce the harm, I guess you'd say. So, I mean, I like that kind of. Oh, go ahead.
Different people react in different ways to, calling themselves an addict or doing the first step of AA. The first step of AA says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Our lives had become unmanageable. You know, when you see TV shows, they often say, "Oh, the first step is admitting you have a problem," but that's not what it says. Actually, it says we admitted we were powerless, and for a lot of people, that's very negative. And it can be very harmful. I tried doing AA, but hearing every meeting over and over again that alcohol was powerful and being told I had to admit I was powerless, well, pretty soon I was drinking more than I ever had in my life because how could I possibly not drink if alcohol is more powerful than I am? For me, anyway, it had the exact opposite effect it's intended to. And, I wound up drinking a liter of whiskey a day until I had to check into medical detox so I didn't die from alcohol withdrawal.
Sure. Would you say there's ways that we're powerful over alcohol? Like, is there some ways that we do have power over alcohol?
Yeah, our whole approach is about your power. It is about your internal strength. We say to everyone, you have the power inside yourself to make the change that you want to change, that you want to make. We don't know what's the best change for you to make. Maybe your best change is to quit. Maybe your best change is to cut back. Regardless, we encourage everyone to be safe and think about safety first because you don't want to be dead. That's not good. That doesn't help anything. Mm-hmm. You don't want to kill anybody else on the way. So we always say, think about safety first, but then, think about what works best for you, quitting or cutting back. And we tell people you have the power to achieve your goal within you. What you need to do is build up your strength because you've, over the years, been building up the strength of your habit now of drinking a lot. Now you need to build up the strength of the other habit of drinking less, of either controlling your drinking or quitting completely.
That makes sense. And I like in the book too. You kind of reference cognitive behavioral therapy and maybe some ways that how we're thinking and the beliefs that we have may influence the drinking that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another program out there called Smart Recovery, which is about quitting drinking, but it's quite different from AA. They also think that you have the strength inside yourself to quit, and they rely a lot on cognitive behavioral therapy. And the honest truth is we stole a lot of stuff from Smart and applied it to... We applied it to controlled drinking. Tom Horvath, who's president of Smart's a good friend of mine. So, we talk about this stuff and about how, it applies. And, we have a lot of commonalities with Smart. People that like our program, a lot of people that decide to quit completely through our program, they also then start doing Smart as well. So they're doing both programs at once. But, they kind of got to the quitting through harm reduction when they came through us. And, for a lot of people, that really works. They start reducing harm. They start being safer. They start cutting back, and they start trying to control. And sometimes they say, I've made a lot of progress controlling my drinking, but it's so much easier when I don't drink at all than when I try to control it that I just want to stop completely.
That makes sense. So, we're talking about some of the elements of HAMS. Is there, your website is hamsnetwork.org. Which somebody who's kind of thinking about, maybe starting like a harm reduction program, what sort of resources would they find on your website?
Well, there's a lot of information on the website. So, if you're not ready to commit to buy the book, which the book is cheap anyway, it's $17 for the paperback, $8 on the Kindle. But, if you just want to explore the ideas before you buy the book, a lot of the information is on the website. So you can go and look up the 17 elements on the website and read them through. You can see our worksheets that we use. We put all the worksheets on the website so that you can print them out. This was especially important because we did the Kindle edition. You can't print out from Kindle, so we put them there. So anything that you need, you can get here on the website, in terms of worksheets, print them out. And we have a lot of exercises that you can do to help you make your changes. And all the exercises, they are clinically researched exercises. They were already out there in the literature. They've been tested. They've been proven to be effective. So I only took things that are pretty much proven to already work because they've already been tested.
That sounds good. So let's say somebody gets your book and they get some forms from the book and from your website, and they start working through, and they feel like they still need some more support. What's out there for them? Or they maybe they need some help getting through some of it. What can they do?
We have online support groups that are worldwide. So we have an email group that has over 1,200 members from all around the world. It gets about 20 messages a day, so it's fairly active without being overwhelming. There's also a real-time chat that is at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 6 Pacific, and we get people from all over the world in there as well. From Australia, we've had people from China. Sometimes we get people from Britain, but it's like 3 a.m. in Britain,
Wow.
So it's not so many people from there. But it's like noon in Australia, so we get a lot of Australians pop in, and of course the majority are Americans, U.S. people. So
That sounds great. Well, what haven't I asked so far that we should be talking about?
well, there are other elements here that people find useful. There's 17 elements. One of the ones that people like a lot that's very useful is keeping a drinking diary, or charting, we call it also. You can just get a calendar if you want to and write down the number of drinks you consume on the calendar each day, or we have a form you can print out if you prefer. Charting has been tested. Mark and Linda Sobel tested it way back in the 70s, I believe, and it was found very effective. In fact, the original intent of the drinking charts they were doing was to get a baseline of the people, the subjects that they were working with, their experimental subjects. And what they found out was when they had people start writing down the number of drinks they were having, they started reducing the amounts, even though they weren't being told to reduce. And, this has later been replicated over and over. As soon as you start writing down, most people reduce automatically because they become so conscious of what they're doing. And this has also been demonstrated with food diaries. When people write down what they eat every day and the number of calories, they start eating less automatically, even without intending to. So these work very well for many different issues. I used them when I quit smoking, and I wrote down every cigarette I had every day until I finally got down to 0. So it's definitely a well-proven and effective methodology to change a habit. We also, on the chart we have that you can print out, we have you can write out your plan, the number of drinks that you're planning to have each day for the week. We do weekly charts, and a lot of people like to do that as well. They will make a plan for the week. On, say, Sunday, I will have 0. On Monday, my friend has a birthday party. I'm going to have 1. Then I'm going to have 0 until Friday when it's the weekend. Maybe I'll have 10 because I want to be intoxicated. But then I'm going to make my plan to be safe so I don't have to drive. I'll take the subway, or I'll go with a designated driver or whatever. And, people can use the chart also to plan their drinking in advance. And there's also an option of writing down your moods, how well you succeeded with your plan, and various things. And people find the charts are really useful to help them change their behavior.
That does sound like a great idea. I mean, we use stuff like that for a lot of things, and not just in the drinking realm, and they're very effective. So, I mean, it's totally. I think that's great advice that you're giving. Another one I like on here, one of the elements is praise yourself for every success. It's go ahead.
Yeah, that's very important. To always remember Because we get people in there all the time that, they say, like, my goal was to abstain 3 days this week, and I only abstained 2 days. I'm a total failure. And we're like, no, you had 2 days of total success. So why don't you concentrate on the fact, you could have had 0 days. And, even if you had 0 days, were you safe? Did you not drink and drive? We always encourage people to remember that they're succeeding in something. And, people always are succeeding in something.
And that makes good sense. Well, I don't want to keep you forever, but I also don't want to lose the opportunity to talk about something that you think people should hear. So, what else is something? Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one thing that I think is really important, and it's the element we have about damage control. We call it damage control. It comes out of Alan Marlat's research on relapse prevention, which goes way back to the 1980s. And Alan Marlat who passed away recently. He was a researcher at the University of Washington, Seattle, who's done a tremendous amount of wonderful work in harm reduction, controlled drinking, all sorts of addiction-related issues. And one of the things he did was a relapse prevention. And he found out, when people had a slip, they very often started beating themselves up, saying how terrible they were, what total failures they were. They started making themselves totally miserable, and the more they beat themselves up, the more likely that this slip, this minor lapse, would turn into a major relapse, because people would be so miserable that they had to, drown their feelings of misery in alcohol, so they would maybe go on, a 3 or 4 day bender or whatever. And Marlat started teaching people to forgive themselves and to stop being so hard on themselves, and to tell them, okay, so you made a mistake, but you don't have to blow it up out of proportion. We're humans, human to err is human, to forgive is divine. So you can forgive yourself, and you can get right back on your plan of abstaining. He called this the abstinence violation effect. And he found that, when people learned that it was okay to mess up now and then, and it was okay to forgive yourself and get back on your plan, the relapses became much shorter, much smaller. There was much less damage involved. There was much less alcohol consumed. He didn't see fewer relapses among those that learned this technique than those that didn't, but there was so much less damage on the way that this relapse prevention strategy of Alan Marlat has actually been accepted fairly widely now. You still won't hear it in the AA meetings, but quite a few treatment facilities have actually adopted this, and it's really successful. And we really encourage our members to be aware of this, and also to be aware, when you do slip up, get your priorities straight. Don't say, "Oh, it's so terrible, I have to go drinking right now," and not make any plan. And, wind up where you're totally smashed and the only way to get home is drive. No, we say, wait, stop and think, do damage control. Okay, if you are going to drink, figure out how to be safe while you drink. So figure out your transportation, make your plan to drink, and so you decided you got fired, you want to get drunk. Okay, figure out how to do it safely, and then get back on your plan after you're done getting drunk.
That makes sense. And it's good to know if AA doesn't work out for people, there's another option out there, which is the opposite, is kind of what you're saying, right, in terms of a harm reduction approach. So people can check out your website, hamsnetwork.org, and definitely check out the book, How to Change Your Drinking, A Harm Reduction Guide to Alcohol, 2nd edition. And it's not a lot of blah, blah wordy. I like that. It's very direct and to the point and very readable. And so, I get some books that are hard to read, and and people can kind of react against that. But it's definitely not one of those kinds of books. It's certainly a book that is readable and useful. So I like that about it. Again, I don't want to rush off the phone. If there's anything else you want to talk about.
Okay. How long did you want to go for?
It doesn't
Do you have
matter. I think usually 20 minutes or something. I feel guilty going any longer than any more longer, stealing all your time. But we can wrap up here if that's what you like.
No, it's fine with me. I'm always happy to talk about harm reduction. I'm going to look right now at our other elements because I can't remember them. I don't know. A lot of people memorize the steps.
I have them in front of me if you want me to read some.
This is something I think is really important. A couple things here. We talk about outside issues. If you've ever been to AA meetings, oftentimes you bring something up and then somebody says, that's an outside issue. You can't talk about that here. And, we take a really different view of that because we think that a lot of these outside issues really impact people's drinking. Things like mental health, things like relationships, sexual relationships, things like employment, things like homelessness. All of these things have such a huge impact on people's drinking that we really urge people, to address these issues. And we tell everybody, these are outside of our scope. We're not experts on giving you financial advice or getting you into housing. This is outside of our scope. But if you're homeless, talk about it, and talk about what you can do to overcome it and, what kind of consultations. If you're unemployed, you need employment. I mean, being unemployed is a real good reason to drink. Being dead broke is really a good reason to drink. People say, well, if you're broke, how can you drink? Well, it doesn't take that much money to buy a quart of cheap vodka.
Right.
People can panhandle that much. They can be street musicians and earn that much in an hour or so. You can always get a hold of some money to drink booze, and you don't even have to rob people like that. The Lost Weekend movie, that always made me so mad when we were being shown that he had to rob to buy booze, and it's like, why didn't you go out and panhandle like a self-respecting drunk? You didn't have to steal that woman's purse. Yeah, alcohol didn't make you do that. You chose to do that instead of doing something more reasonable. But when people are broke, they can be miserable, and alcohol's a really cheap way to address that misery. So getting financial stability we think is important. Addressing mental health issues is huge. So we encourage people to work with services and professionals that can help to address these issues. We think it's really important to get them taken care of, and that it's much easier to deal with your drinking, when you're getting these issues taken care of as well.
Right, and I'm looking at some of the 17 elements in that, and it includes like learning to cope without booze is number 7, and learning to have fun without booze, that might apply to is number 9. So I think that makes sense in terms of if you need help in terms of finding some other way to cope, other professionals or just friends or people you have fun with too can help support you with some of those things.
Yeah, our organization can teach you some coping skills. I mean, there's quite a number of cognitive behavioral strategies that you can learn in a self-help manner and apply yourself. We have some of them in the book, like doing the ABC, the Albert Ellis classic, the activating event, the consequent action. The activating event might be you got fired from your job. The consequent action might be that you decided that you got drunk. But in between the two, there's the B, there's the belief. And, the belief might be, I have to get drunk because I got fired, or you can change the belief. This is what Albert Ellis taught, You can change that belief that lies in between the activating event and the consequent action. And if you believe, I don't have to get drunk, I can cope with this on my own without drinking alcohol at all, that's a different belief. And, if you learn to adopt a different belief, you will have a different action. And these are some skills that we talk about in the book. We also refer people to, some other books that go into more detail. David Burns has a good book called Feeling Good. It's a really nice self-help reference for cognitive behavioral therapy. And Albert Ellis has several books. My favorite title is How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable in Spite of Anything. Yes, anything.
He has some funny titled books. And David Burns was actually on the podcast, so you can listen to his interview that we did on the mentalhealthday.org. It's linked to from there too. So.
Oh, that's great. I was fortunate enough to interview him on our HAMS podcast as well. I mean, he's such an important person out there, and I think he's helped so many people with that book.
It makes good sense. So I think maybe to summarize, if people are kind of thinking about maybe whether or not AA works for them or not, if they're liking the idea of sort of a harm reduction approach to their alcohol, they should check out some of the forums on your website, some of the resources on your website. There's support groups. Your book has a lot of great information, and even starting with like this cost benefit analysis of your drinking, right? So what types of costs, what kinds of problems is it creating, things like that, and what the benefits are, and then maybe kind of coming up with goals. It's probably a good way to start, right? Maybe safer drinking, reduced drinking, quitting, some ways to kind of address some of those problems that are being created. So I think it's a great approach.
Yeah, we have the only program in the world where you can come in and say, well, I decided to stop drinking and driving because that's a dumb idea, but I still want to get drunk every day. And we'll say, well, that's a good idea.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah,
it definitely sounds safer.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't. There are other moderate drinking programs out there like moderation management, which it's a good fit for a lot of people, but that's not a place where you can go with that goal, because it's got you better stick within the moderate limits, or you better go to AA, because there's not really. It's kind of black and white in that way. Whereas we are really pure harm reduction. We say anything that you can do to reduce the harm is a positive change, and we will support anything that reduces harm.
Well, that's great. But I appreciate you talking to me. We can probably wrap up there because I don't want to steal all your time. But you also should check out your podcast. I'm sorry, could you repeat the name of your podcast?
The podcast is called Addiction Treatments That Work. It's on Blog Talk Radio. If you go to our homepage, you will see a link to it from our homepage. Or if you go to blogtalkradio.com and you search for harm reduction or addiction treatments that work, or the URL is blogtalkradio.com/harm-reduction. If you want to type it all in.
Sometimes that's easiest, though, instead of searching around. Well, thank you again. It was good talking to you, and we can probably wrap up there. Do you have any questions for me or anything before we go?
I just want to say I really appreciate you having me on the show, and I hope that this information can get out to a lot of people out there who work in the mental health field. A lot of people that work in the field aren't aware that there are options besides AA that they can recommend people to, but there are several other options. Some are abstinence-based, like Smart Recovery, Life Ring, secular organizations for sobriety. They call themselves SOS. There's Women for Sobriety. There's moderation management for people who want a more strictly defined moderation program. And then there's our HAMS, harm reduction program, which encourages any positive change, and where it doesn't matter how much you drink, how little you drink, you're welcome here.
It makes good sense. So people should go right now to www.hamsnetwork.org.
Visit the podcast at www.mentalhealthday.org.
Malfunction.